Well, hey, it's your friend Fred, your local, helpful neighborhood English teacher. I'm here today to talk to you a little bit about the medieval period and our good friend Geoffrey Chaucer. He may not be your friend now, but he will be. He's a pretty cool guy. Anyway, this could be a really, really long video because we're going to cover several hundred years in just a couple minutes. So, where we left the story with our Anglo-Saxons is that Vikings had come to town. 790s, somewhere in there, Vikings start to ruin the party for the Saxon people of Britain. They fight, blah, blah, blah. Somewhere in the 800s, like 880 something, a dude named Alfred, they eventually call him Alfred the Great, so you can imagine how powerful he thought he was. He beats the Vikings, gives them half of England, takes half of England from the Saxons, fine. They go back and forth for several hundred years, the Saxons people, the Vikings. Then, blah, 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 skip. It gets to the year 1066. 1066 has to be, for British history, three of the worst weeks in British history happen in the fall of 1066. In September, around September 20th, this king of Norway, his name is like Harold Hardrada, he invades. 5 days later, at the Battle of Stamford Bridge, the king of England defeats him. Then 3 days later, William of Normandy from France invades England, and he marches forward, and then finally on October 14th, 1066, at the Battle of Hastings, William of Normandy becomes William the Conqueror, defeating Harold II of England, and effectively that's what we call in the business the Norman Conquest. Now, I took a little time there for a reason. 1066 is a huge year in world history, but especially in British history, and especially in the history of English language and literature. Up until this point, English is kind of this Germanic tongue. You heard it in Beowulf, you know. And then in 1066, when the Normans come in, they bring in Old French. So they bring in that, which is derived from Latin. So they bring all those Latin words into the party, okay? And that changes the language forever. A lot of the words that we use all the time, excellent, exceptional, beautiful, they're all coming out of the Norman conquest. So lots of things change, and French becomes the language of court. Latin, of course, is still there in the church, but it changes English forever. Okay, so once the Normans come in, England gets to be more what you would recognize as medieval. Normans are famous for building stone castles. So castles start being built, big churches start being built. There is almost constant political upheaval on the British throne. Now the problem is not Viking invaders. Now the problem is the French. Because William was a French nobleman who came in, and now he is the king of England, and then he dies, and there's kids, but there's land disputes between England and France. And these go on for hundreds and hundreds of years. You have lots of king changes. I'm not going to go into the king changes and the dramatic dynastic conflicts. I will tell you that there are some really cool people that we may talk about later. If we were going to really delve into this, we would talk about Henry II and his wife Eleanor of Aquitaine. Henry II is a Plantagenet king, or Plantagenet as they say in France. This is a huge famous old French family. Eleanor of Aquitaine owned like a third of France or something. She's also this super like literary queen. She like supported the arts and stuff. So it's a huge, beautiful era. It gets really crazy. Henrys go on. Things get crazy. Then at some point there's this dude who becomes king. This is in like the beginning of the 13th century, so the 1200s. Edward the First. If you've seen the movie Braveheart, this is him. He's most famous for like for dealing with Wales, but also for conquering Scotland. There's some real drama with his kid. His kid, Edward II, marries Isabella of France. They do not get along well. Isabella eventually is sent back to France, supposedly to negotiate some things, but really because Edward II didn't want her around. She has this lover named Roger Mortimer. Eventually, Isabella comes back to France with her lover. They invade. They defeat Edward II's troops in battle. Then Isabella and Roger put their son Edward III on the throne and kill Edward II. Just drama. Okay, this goes on. Constantly. And the problem is that we have intermarriage between nobles in France and nobles in England. So if you're a French nobleman, you have English land. If you're an English nobleman, you have French land. So you have a lot of tension between France and England. Somewhere around the 1330s, this thing called the 100 Years' War starts, and it literally lasts about 110 years, and it's literally 100 years of pretty continuous conflict between England and France. If you've ever heard of Joan of Arc, she wins her battles during the 100 Years' War. Early in the 100 Years' War, 1350s or 60s, we're not really sure when, Geoffrey Chaucer is born outside of London. His parents are pretty wealthy. They're not noble, but, they're in that kind of elevated merchant class. They're court adjacent. He's born. He gets a job as a page in the king's house. He serves in the war in France. He comes back. He becomes a customs officer. So that happens. There is one date here that I want to specifically mention. I'm sorry I didn't get these out earlier, but there is a very specific and important. I'm sorry that I'm flipping through my thing. Oh, yeah. A couple things that I really want to hit. Yeah, okay. So the big one that kills everything, the big, huge problem, 1348-49, that's Black Plague. That's a plague year. So, you're, in a mild pandemic year. 1348 and 49 is plague year in London, in England. About half of the British population dies that year. So pretty rough. That happens. There's some political intrigue that we don't really need to get into. One of Geoffrey Chaucer's wife is the daughter of one of the daughters of this guy named John of Gaunt, who is the guy who helps make Henry Bolingbroke become Henry IV. That only matters to you if you really care about British history. This is where Tudors, the Tudor dynasty that's going to eventually produce the Elizabethan people, that's where this is all getting started. Anyway, if we were having a really fun time with Shakespeare, we could read those plays, but I'm not going to do that to you. But he's connected to Chaucer. This is a good one, yeah. June 15th, 1381. This is shortly after Chaucer. We know Chaucer began writing the Canterbury Tales, his most famous work, in about, it's 1387. So about 6 years earlier than this, on June 15th, 1381, there is a huge peasant revolt in London, and all of the working class, the peasant people revolt. They march. There's lots of it's put down very violently. But this is a huge revolution because there's so much king chaos that the people are being overworked. They're starving. They're constantly being sent off to war. So there was a huge revolt, and this really profoundly influenced Chaucer. His experience as a customs officer and as a soldier and as a citizen of London is what led him to be able to write about all of the classes of people that he writes about in the Canterbury Tales. So I'm going to switch there for just a second, just so you're ready. So first, the Canterbury Tales are absolutely foundational in British literature. Now, these kinds of stories that have people telling their stories in them, these have been done before, the most famous being Boccaccio's Decameron, which is written about 60 or so years earlier, a little bit earlier, in the Black Plague in Italy. What's different about Chaucer is that his story of pilgrims going to Canterbury is that they're from all social classes. There's knights, there's merchants, there's teachers, there's friars, there's just women. It represents the spectrum of English society, and so that's one of the reasons that it stands out to people today, is that we don't get portraits in literature from this time period of regular people. So that's Chaucer. I will tell you that it is very popular literature. It's going to seem at first like it's a little bit, but it's not like that at all. this stuff is gritty, grimy. It's kind of, there's some really lowbrow moments. I mean, there are several fart jokes. There's lots of kind of like body humor. It's really kind of sarcastic about ruling structures. It's definitely critical of the Catholic Church, which would have been a common thing for some people to think in England at this time. So it gives us a really interesting slice of actual life there at the end of the 14th, beginning of the 15th century. So that's one of the reasons that it's really great. Plus, it's super fun. I mean, I think he's really funny. A quick tip when you're reading the Chaucer that I've given you, the Harvard site, it has the Chaucer's English there in bold, and underneath it in unbolded type is the modern English translation. So just get used to reading those modern lines. But I think that if you kind of every once in a while glance up at Chaucer's English, you'll start to see that it gets closer and closer to our English. Middle English is, it's really close, but you can see where the French and stuff and the Latin is coming in and making it closer to the big mess of a language that we have today. So that's about it. I'm not going to really burden you with any more. I mean, I have like 6 pages of notes, and if you're one of my face-to-face kids, you'll probably hear more about this because I, for whatever reason, am fascinated by this period. Probably because this is like one of those times where like it really starts to look like a world I recognize. It would have been different for us to be back there, but a lot of it's the same. It's working, it's going out to eat, it's having drama with your girlfriend or with your girlfriend's friends. It's that world, and Chaucer especially really is one of the first people, well, definitely for me, the first in English literature that puts it on the page. And so I hope you enjoy our time with Chaucer. We'll be discussing the general prologue tomorrow, and then we'll be moving on to the Knight's Tale, the Miller's Tale, which it's a particularly special piece of literature, and then the Wife of Bath's Tale, which is nice because we'll actually get to hear, I mean, even though it's a man writing, at least it'll be a woman's perspective. So that'll be fun for us. Anyway, hopefully this wasn't too crazy of a video. Obviously it went longer than I wanted it to go, but it is what it is. So make sure you're going through the general prologue. Make sure that read for tomorrow, which is Tuesday. And remember, we're going to be having a quiz on Wednesday. And again, that will cover The Wanderer, that will cover Beowulf, and it will cover the general prologue of the Canterbury Tales. So if you have any questions, hit me up on email. By the way, be sure to smash that like button on this video, and also go ahead, you know what, and make an old man happy and subscribe to this video. Anyway, as always, it's my pleasure to be your teacher, and whatever I can do for you, I will do my best to do. Have a great rest of your weekend, and I'll see you face-to-face or virtually soon.